session number 1 in our video conference series. So first of all, let me just say I'm really excited to get into this discussion with everybody. I'm really excited to get into this discussion with everybody on these 5 topics that I've selected to talk about as it relates to the afterlife and reincarnation experiences. And this whole notion of, are they real? Is there is it a reliable source to look at in terms of verifying this idea of the reality of the afterlife and reincarnation, or what? What do we think about that? So I am going to talk today, session 1, about what happens when we die. All right, so let's just get right into this. First of all, let me just say that my objective with regards to everything that I talk about, those of you who know me, you've been to other sessions that I've talked about, the book, my book that I've written, and people have seen my book, and many of you have read my book. You know my perspective, or you've taken my meditation class. You know my perspective on these things. Those of you who are new to, we're just meeting here for the first time today. Let me just say this. My whole objective with everything I do is to demystify the mystical. I'm all about demystifying it, taking away the mystery about this esoteric, what many people refer to as kind of mysterious type of concepts, ideas, and potentially experiences. You'll see that as I talk about my experiences and other people's experiences, and I hope you will be sharing your experiences as well during these sessions, my whole idea of looking at that, wrapping my mind around them, is to look at them as more normal, natural experiences of, quite frankly, everyday human life. Now, that's not the case for most people. I get that. I understand that. But I've been having these experiences for 40 years. And my memories go back 6,000 years. So we'll get into that in a later session when we talk about reincarnation and so forth. But I've had experiences on the other side of the veil, we'll call it, and we'll talk about what I mean by that today, for decades. And so when you have these kinds of experiences for so long, they just become normal, natural. It's like not a big deal. Imagine if you had never experienced waking state and you'd always been sleeping and dreaming. And then all of a sudden you woke up and you walked down a hallway and it didn't become really, really long every time you went down the hallway. Or you walked through a doorway and you didn't bump into the door jamb every time. Then you could actually navigate the doorway because your frame of reference and your experience of depth perception and everything in waking state was very different from when you were in dream state, right? Well, that's kind of what my experience has evolved to over the many, many, many decades that I've been having these experiences that we'll talk about. They're just very normal, natural experiences for me. So my whole thing, as I said, is demystifying them, okay? And then my general approach, and and this is a little bit of a review in terms of knowing this about me, but maybe this is not the way you've heard me describe it, even those of you who have been exposed to my teaching before. My approach here in this video conference series that we're going to do, the 6-part series, is to talk and think about these abstract concepts in a rational way. So in a logical as possible way, backed up by our own direct experience, or in this case, my direct experience, or those experiencers, those people I know on this side and in the other side, of what their direct experience with this whole area of the afterlife is. Okay? And then, like I said, I want to open it up, and those of you who have had experiences, absolutely I want you to share that. Okay? So, here's the thing. After we die, I want to make several general statements about what happens after we die. So, first of all, one general statement I want to make, and we can come back and revisit these, and you may have questions about any of these, and you should write down the questions so you don't forget. Feel free. Scribble down questions while you're sitting there. And those of you who are on the web link, you can type questions to me in the chat room if you want to privately do that as well, because I can see it in the little chat box on my screen. But other than that, otherwise, you could just remember it or scribble down a question about any of these or anything we're talking about during any of these sessions. So here are 4 general statements about after we die. Number 1, there is less difference between here and there, whatever the there is, quote unquote, there, T-H-E-R-E, between here and there than we think. There's less difference between here and there than we think. Point number 2, the there, quote unquote, is not far away. It's just unseen by us. We just don't see it. But it's not really far away from us. And I'll get into subtleties of what I mean by that in our discussion, okay? And you can ask questions about that. Third point, we all pretty much know already that after we die, there's no dense physical body. We don't have this physical body because the physical body has died. It's dead now. It has died, and there's no physical body. So the fourth point is what's continuing is our mind. Okay, those are 4 general statements about after we die. So let's go back and unbundle this a little bit. So, and what else can we say about this general idea of what happens after we die? We'll unbundle these points a little bit starting this way. So first, let's talk about an underlying principle, the first law of thermodynamics. And those of you who've read my book, you've seen you've read a section in there where I talk about the first law of thermodynamics. And I'm just going to very briefly state it right now. You can go on Wikipedia, you can read about it in more detail there. But basically the third law of thermodynamics is this: energy cannot be created or destroyed. So it's a basic principle of the universe, that energy cannot be created or destroyed. So that means if I have this pencil and I try to destroy this pencil, I burn it or whatever, what happens? It turns into ash. We don't see a pencil like this anymore, right? But if we're really talking about this true principle of thermodynamics, this principle of also referred to as conservation of energy, same thing. This conservation of energy is not just the ashes, not just the physical ashes that this pencil becomes after we burn it. It's also the heat energy that comes from this. And there are chemicals that are given off. There are gases that are given off in the process of burning this pencil, for example, right? So all of that would need to be collected in order to honor this principle of conservation of energy. So if we're talking about the mind continuing, and if the mind is in fact energy, and if we're talking about that is what's continuing after our physical body dies, which obviously, if anything's going to continue, it's going to be our mind, right? Because our physical body is no longer alive. That's not continuing to live. It's not alive anymore. It's dead by definition. And so what's continuing to live is our mind. Our mind has not died, has not ended. That's how I'm defining the word dead, okay? It has not ended. The mind is continuing then. And so the logical reason for the mind continuing is this first law of thermodynamics. This law that says that energy cannot be created or destroyed, okay? And so those who argue that, no, the mind can't continue, like my dad, who claimed to be a scientist. He was an engineer. There's a few of you on the call who may remember my dad from when we were kids growing up. So my dad was a scientist, and yet his thinking was conflated. It was confused. It did not take into account this first law of thermodynamics, that if the mind is energy, because he didn't view the mind as energy. See, the way he logically, in his mind, justified his thinking was that he said, no, the mind and the brain are inextricably connected, and therefore, when my brain dies, he thought, his mind shuts off. Now, you and I know that I embrace all belief systems, and I am not doing these video conference series on this afterlife and reincarnation to try to persuade people that they should change their belief systems to the second, third, or fourth belief system and ignore the first belief system in my, what I call the first belief system in my book. Those of you who haven't read the book, can check it out online and see what I'm talking about here, which is basically what I'm telling you is the physical science belief is the first belief, or my dad's belief, which I just described to you. So I'm not here to change people's belief system. I'm here to give you explanation for why that belief system could be fallacious, could be wrong, if the person starts to believe that the mind and the body actually are separate from each other and do exist separate from each other. And one reason that I give for people to think about this idea of the mind and the body being separate from each other is this idea of going to sleep at night. And we all go to sleep at night. Every night we go to sleep. We go to sleep and what happens? We dream. We have dreams. And our physical body is still lying in that bed over there. It's not flying through the air. It's not going to the beach swimming. It's not walking in hotels. I have these dreams where I'm in hotels. That's why I'm telling you that. I have these dreams being in elevators in hotels. I don't know why. And then, and I'm talking to people. I'm going to meetings in hotels. I have other experiences, which, that experience, other explanations of that experience, which I'll tell you later. But whatever your experience is in your dream, the point is, your physical body is not doing that. Your physical body is still lying there. The mind and the body are distinct. They are not experiencing the same things all the time. Okay? So, my brain may be lying physically in my bed, but my brain thinks, or my mind thinks, I'm flying an airplane, or I'm in a train somewhere, or whatever, in my dreams, right? So there are examples like that, which we can point to, that logically kind of make us think, you know what? I think my mind and my body are separate from each other. I don't think my mind my mind continues just because of my brain's activity. All right, and we'll give other examples of this as we go along. So, just a couple of other general points I want to hit on before we open up to questions about all of this stuff. And again, keep in mind, you scribble down questions about these things as well. What about the body? What about the physical body? We say after we die, that after we die, this physical body right here that you're seeing on my screen, this Kelvin Chin body, the one that you recognize, that you've seen me in videos and maybe even face to face as Kelvin Chin, this physical body is going to die. It's not going to be there anymore. I get cremated. So much for this physical body, right? So, but after Kelvin Chin dies, does he still have a sort of physical body, we'll call it? And the short answer is yes. On the other side, my experience is that I still perceive people who have an identifiable energy pattern, I call it. So, not ghosts in the way that most people think of ghosts, but I suppose people could interpret them as ghosts, because I have friends I know, I see, and they have portrayed themselves to me, and we'll talk about this in this discussion today, in this session, about how they can do that, in a way, portray themselves in a way that looks like me. So I could come to you, let's just use me as an example. After I die, after I'm cremated, my physical body is destroyed. It is gone. It does not physically exist, this physical body anymore that you see as Kelvin Chin. This beautiful head of hair, I'm joking. Anyway, so that doesn't exist anymore. And yet I could come to you in a quasi-physical form. I say quasi. So I'm an energy form at that time, at that point, because my mind is continuing. My mind can create a form in which Dawn, Kimmy, Ellen, whoever, you could see me, Mary Paz, you could see me as in the way that you see me now. I could show it to you. I could show it to you to remind you of who I am. Okay? So we can come back to that. But I have had a number of experiences like this where I've actually physically seen. I've seen Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. You know, many of you know I studied personally with him in the 1970s. He died in 2008. I've seen him. And then I've had other experiences where I don't even just see him, but I have felt his presence and I recognize his presence. We can talk about that in our Q&A session in a few minutes. My ex-girlfriend, Kim's father, Jimmy, who I write about in the book. Jimmy has come to me a number of times since he died, and I know it's him. I recognize him. Nancy's brother in the book. I won't get into the details of the story. Many of you have read the book. If you haven't, you should check it out. There's a story about Nancy's brother in there, and the chapter is called "No Smoking in Heaven," because he randomly told me I didn't recognize his energy form because I didn't know him. I didn't know anything about him. I didn't know where he lived. I just knew that she had a dead brother. I didn't know how old he was. I didn't know when it happened. I didn't know circumstances. I didn't know anything. But he came and told me some messages to give his sister, Nancy, a friend of mine who lived in a different city from me. And he told me two random things. He said, there's no smoking here. I thought, what? That's bizarre. Why is he telling me no smoking here? And then the other thing he told me, which he showed me on like a TV screen in my mind. He showed me an image of himself and his sister coming out of a San Diego nightclub along Route 8 in San Diego. Those of you who are from or have been to San Diego, you know where I'm talking about, Hotel Circle. So he showed me his picture in my mind of like the Hotel Circle area there. There's a whole bunch of hotels, so they call it Hotel Circle. But it's along Route 8 in San Diego. And he showed me him and his sister coming out of a nightclub, and they were laughing. That's all he showed me. And so then I called her up and I told her, and I said, no smoking. What's that about? And she goes, oh, he hated cigarette smoke. He grew up in the era when there were smoking was everywhere, and he would go around and ask people to stop smoking. In smoking, just in bars, anyway, places where people normally smoked a lot, and he would ask them to stop smoking. He hated cigarette smoke. And I said, what was it about the bar thing coming out of this nightclub in San Diego? And he said, oh, well, that's where he lived. I didn't know that. Kelvin Chin did not know that. He lived in San Diego, and the last time she saw him alive, they went to a nightclub along Route 8, off of Hotel Circle, and he sang karaoke and got a standing ovation. He got a standing ovation, and it was a really happy moment for them. And it was the last time she saw him alive. He killed himself 2 weeks later. So that was a marker for her to know that this was her brother, because I didn't know her brother, and her brother is telling me this stuff to give her this message. So there are many, many stories like that. Some of you may have had visitations and stories like that too, which I'd love to hear from you about. But there's identifiers is the point. There's ways of identifying. Another key point I want to just plant a seed in your head. Another point is that we don't merge into some cosmic soup. You can kind of infer from what I'm saying here that that's the case. So a lot of different traditions, the Vedic tradition, which has now been refuted by the originators of the Vedic tradition. If you haven't seen 30thnovember.com, you should go there and you should watch the video there. If you haven't seen that yet, 30thnovember.com is the website. If you don't remember this later, you can ask me. But I organized this, and where the originators of the Vedic and Judeo-Christian traditions talk about this not merging into some cosmic soup. That's my words, cosmic soup. That's Kelvin Chin vernacular. You know how informal I generally am. So that means that change after we die what happens? Change and therefore individuality still exists. Our identity still exists. Something of Kelvin Chin's personality still exists. And we'll talk more about this in another session, but I want to plant this seed and we can talk about it somewhat here. All right? What does that mean? If change still exists on the other side, we're calling it the other side, after we die, in the afterlife, that means that time still exists. Because what is time? Time is a measurement of change, right? It's an arbitrary measurement of change in the way we define it arbitrarily as 24 hours in a day, 12 months in a year. You know, it didn't used to be 12 months in a year. There used to be 10 months in a year a few thousand years ago, you know, back in Roman times and so forth. You know, we're 12 months. So it was an arbitrary thing. We've come up with this, this whole idea of time in terms of a certain way of measuring it. But time in general is a measurement of change. And so that means if there is change on the other side, which there seems to be, because dead people still have individuality in my experience with many dead people, then that means if they have individuality, there's continual change. Change is continuing in the afterlife. Now, does that mean that the experience of change is the same in the afterlife as it is here? No. The experience of change is different on the other side. And I have a number of experiences. We can come back and we can talk about that. All right? Different speed of time on the other side. We'll come back in the Q&A and talk about that. What about this idea of tunnels of light? This idea of tunnels of light. Is it always like that? Not necessarily. Let's come back and talk about that in the Q&A. What about being greeted by old friends and loved ones on the other side? Very common experience. Okay? We can talk more about that. All right? What about climbing mountains? What about physical forms on the other side? What about that? If that's curious, write a note to yourself, and we'll talk more about that in the Q&A now. Okay? Okay? So let's open up to Q&A. I'm going to touch more on those points because I don't want to take any more of our time here. I want to leave a good, what do we got? About another 30, 40 minutes Q&A, and I can get into some more details of some of the points I've already raised and some of the points I just lightly touched on at the end. All right? So let's open it up now. People, questions about anything that I said so far. Go ahead. Kimmy? Anybody? Cayman?
Hey, Kelvin.
Yes.
It's Mary Paz.
Mary Paz, yes.
Can you talk more about the communication between people who have passed and the people who are here?
Yes.
Is it necessary? Well, you said that you had the communication with Nancy's brother.
Yes.
But you had a connection there with Nancy.
Yes.
Is it necessarily people with whom you're familiar?
Yeah. So the question is to talk more about communications between us on this side who are physically alive and those who are not alive physically, and vice versa, and them communicating with us. And the question is that more with people we know? I knew Nancy, but I didn't know her brother. Or what about people we don't know? That kind of a thing. Okay? So here's the thing on that. My experience is, so back to this point that I said at the very outset. What did I say? One of the general points. The first one I said, there's less difference between here and there than we think. All right? So here's an example, Mary Paz, of what I mean by that. In this example, there are many examples, but in this specific question, the way you're asking it, think about it. Just think about it on this side. Who do we generally communicate with on this side? We generally communicate on this side with people we know, right? we're familiar with them. People we know, friends, loved ones, maybe even acquaintances. Do we ever communicate with people who are unknown to us on this side? Absolutely. We do that sometimes, but much less frequently. Okay? I think it's no different from the other side in communicating between here and there. It's no different. It's when you have a connection with somebody, it's easier to communicate with somebody. On this side, it's easier for all kinds of reasons. If we send them an email, they're more likely to respond to it than blow us off, right? If we know them, right? People think you're trying to sell something to them. Well, on the other side, it's similar, except more of a relational and energetic kind of connection. It's easier if you have, in that way, if you have an energetic connection with, so a relational connection. It could be a heart related, like you love them, and there's a connection that way, or maybe more mental in terms of intellectual, that you know who they were, and you ran into them a few times on this side, but you didn't really know them that well. So it's not really a heart-related thing so much, but it's more mental. So, but there's some connection. So the more connection, I would say, the more likely that that's going to take place. But it's not an absolute rule. And I've had many experiences with people I don't know. I have know nothing about them. It's not as frequent. And I think it's not as frequent for a couple of reasons. Number one is, I think we don't have to look at this too esoterically, is my point. I think we can look at it, like I said, not that big a difference between this side and the other side. Use rules that we would apply on this side, and I found that many of those rules apply on the other side too. Why? Because we're still minds. Once you die, you're still a mind on the other side. You're not thinking all of a sudden differently. Yes, the afterlife, the structure of it may be different. The experience of time may be different, and so forth. But your mental experience, your mind is still experiencing and still has the same biases. Biases meaning like, well, I prefer to talk with friends who I know rather than friends who I don't know. I mean, acquaintances I don't know, right? So you're still going to have that bias. And so no different on the other side. And so also easier from an energetic standpoint from the other side coming this way to communicate with somebody in physical reality, easier energetically, I think, the pathway, the energetic pathway, so to speak, is easier. Forget about relational. I'm talking about structural now, okay? Ray Paz? I'm talking about a structural thing where the energetic pathway may be a little bit easier this way, going this way from them to us, if there is more of a connection on some level. So I'll give you an example. Like when I was organizing the 30th November talk, I started getting some communications from the other side, from I call them the committee. They didn't call themselves that, but I refer to them as the committee because there was a group of them, about 8 or 10 people, I'll call them people, who were on the other side, who had been on this side. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi was one of them. He died in 2008. There were a number of others, which we can talk about in another session when we get into that session. What is it? Session number 5, when we talk about friends communicating from the other side. I'll talk more about this, and I'll tell you who they were communicating with me from the other side, including Maharishi. But these were leaders from the Judeo-Christian tradition and the Vedic tradition. And so I had a connection with them. I have an old connection with them, which I'll get into with you when I get into the reincarnation, which is the 3rd session. When I get into that one, I'll tell you a little bit more about my history and what I remember. So this will make sense. But my point is, Mary Paz, that I had a connection with them on some level. I didn't know each of them really intimately, and I didn't know them as well as I know you, for example. But I knew them, and there was a connection. So energetically, I think structurally, the pathway to communicate both ways is a little bit easier. Does that help?
Yes.
Yeah. Other questions? Other questions? Shoot. Go ahead. Anybody?
Angelique
Kelvin?
posted a
Yeah,
question.
go ahead. Oh, there's a Angelique. Thank you. Why is it easy? Thanks, Mary Beth. Why is it easy for some people to connect with those on the other side than it is for others? So why is it easy for some people to connect on the other side, and some people it's not so easy? Here's the thing. First of all, there are several factors. It's a good question. There are several factors involved with connecting with the other side. Number one, I'll just use myself as an example, okay? I'm the guinea pig here. So sometimes I'm more tired than other times. And this has absolutely happened to me. And I'll give you an example. When I was organizing that 30th November talk, at some point I could feel people knocking on the door, so the proverbial door. I could feel telepathically or psychically, I don't know how you're going to describe it, but I could sense that somebody wanted to talk with me. And I just said, you know what? I had just come back from my office job. I was working in Austin, Texas at the time. And I was just exhausted. And I said, I can't talk to you now. I just said, I can't right now. I'm just too tired. So there's the me factor, my neurophysiology being exhausted. That's not a good state of mind to be. You got to be open, not just psycho-emotionally open. You got to be physically open as well. Okay? Now that's not to say that it's impossible to get communications if you are physically exhausted. Anything is possible. I'm just saying we're talking probabilities here, right? So I'm talking about likelihoods. I'm talking about increasing the probability, increasing the likelihood. Then that means be really rested, balanced, not hungry, all of that stuff, okay? So, and psycho-emotionally open. You know, I'm working with some people to help open them up more with this. And it's a process. It is not overnight. It's an organic process. Some people want to be more open to communicating with the other side. And there's no guarantees, okay? But the other thing is the other side. You got to look at it from the other side. Here's another example of what I said at the beginning. I said there's less difference between here and there. Here's another example. They, on the other side, are busy. And they're just sometimes too busy. They're doing other things to communicate with us on this side. Now, it's just, and I've had many examples of this, and one of which is in my book. You can read about John, a lawyer who I leave people's last names out for anonymity for obvious reasons. But John is a lawyer. I worked with at a law firm once, and you can read the story in there about his brother being off climbing mountains, he said, on the other side. And how is that possible, climbing mountains? We can talk about that if you want to in a few minutes. But I've had other experiences where people have just come by very quickly because they've been on their way and just said something very quickly and said, gotta go, basically. So there's this issue that we always have to remember. It's not like everybody's just sitting back. Some people might be sitting back on a beach on the other side with plenty of time. Other people are running around doing stuff, and we can talk about some of the stuff that I know that some of them are doing on the other side. But there's the other side of the story too, is the point. So and then there's a third element here, is that I've had this communicated to me many times from the other side, which is the following. It's not so easy to communicate from the other side to us as we think. People think that, well, the psychics are this and that, and blah, 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 blah. It's not as easy as we think. The density, the change, the density of this physical reality where we live, and the lack of density, we'll just say, of the somewhat physical reality. I'm using qualifiers here because I can describe to you what I mean by it, if you like. But the somewhat physical reality that exists on the other side is very, very, very different. And so it's kind of like, dogs on this side can hear things that humans can't hear. There are night animals, animals, nocturnal animals, not night animals, but you know what I mean. Animals who are very nocturnal. They come out at night and they do a lot of stuff at night, who have a whole different range of visual perception than we do, much greater range at night. They have almost like night vision, right? Then we don't. And so they can see things we can't see at night. It's kind of analogous to that on the other side. So, and some people are just, Angelique, some people are just more just born open. And you'll talk to some of them, and it's not always a good thing. It's not always, so don't desire it at exclusion of all else. In other words, it's not necessarily always a good thing. I have examples of that which we can get into when we talk about reincarnation, and how some people I know have remembered stuff that they'd rather not remember. So it's not always a great thing to be completely wide open. And you'll hear some psychics talk about this. So boundaries are not a bad thing. So that's kind of a bunch of different ways of looking at it, Angelique. I hope that helps. So Becky says, I once had a friend who said goodbye to me in my dreams shortly after he passed away. Was this just a dream? How do I know if it was actually him or was it just a dream? So that's a great question, because I think that if we had a show of hands just amongst the 20 of us on the call right now, that a lot of you have probably had some experience like that, or maybe even the similar or same experience that Becky just described. After somebody dies, a friend or a loved one coming to us in a dream. And my view on this is, first of all, so how do you know? Was it just a dream, or did they actually come to you? Well, there are a number of different data, I call them data points or touch points to look at. What was the clarity of the dream? Was it really, really clear? And it doesn't have to be really, really clear for it to actually be proof that it was. But these are just various factors to look at, and then you kind of weigh them all and you kind of look at it. Was it a really clear dream? Did it seem really real? Was there any marker that they left afterwards? Like, for example, and in my book I talk about this, Pam's waking up having a dream about her mom, and in the room just smells of her mom's perfume. The same perfume. Her mom wore one perfume, and it's just like the same perfume, and it just reeks of that smell. And somebody else told me a similar story recently. Her husband's certain smell of her husband's clothes and so forth after he died. And so those kind of markers. But here's my thing on this, Becky. My bottom line is, it's not really that. It's not crucially important that we know absolutely for sure, because my feeling is on you have a dream like that of a loved one coming to you. Yes, there may be external objective markers that you can look at. There's another story in the book where my friend George had a dream come to him, and and this woman came and said, please tell my younger sister I'm okay, that I just died. And he was in Germany, and the sister was in Wisconsin. The two sisters were in Wisconsin, but not together. And he did, he knew them from childhood, but he hadn't been in touch with them for 40 years or 30 years or something like that. And the woman showed him a scene. And so this had objective markers in it. A scene where she was talking to 8 people. And it turns out that in real life back in Wisconsin, at that moment, she was talking to a group of 8 people. The younger sister was a group of 8 people at a school, and the older sister who had just died was standing in a doorway looking at her sister in this visual that George saw in his dream. Okay, those are fairly objective markers. How would he know that, But you may be talking about something, Becky, I'm guessing, that it doesn't have as clear objective markers. So my recommendation is, is to look at it as a touch point, that they did touch you, that it was real. And why? Because it's going to make you feel better that they're coming to say goodbye to you. And if we have a choice there, I choose freedom over contraction. I choose expansion over contraction in that given situation if I have a binary choice. In other words, binary, a yes or a no. I choose yes as opposed to no. in that situation where I don't know. There's no objective touch points like I've just given you in these other examples. Okay? Does that help? Other questions? Other questions?
Kelvin, can you touch on this topic of when you die, you go to this light, and you go through a light?
Yes.
You know. Yeah.
Yep. So this notion of going to the light or going to the light or going through a tunnel of light. Oh, Levi, I see that you have a question up here. I will ask this, answer that later. Tunnels of light. So, tunnel of light. Some people have that experience. Do all people have that experience? No. So here's a really, really important point to understand about what happens after we die. There is no experience that's always the same for everybody. There's a general structure. Yes, the physical body dies. Yes, we have a different physical structure on the other side. We have more of like a light energy body. You know, it's more like made of light or energy. It's not a physical, hard, dense structure like the one I have here, Kelvin Chin's body right here that you can hear me slapping. You know, it's not like that. Okay, yes, okay, so there is some commonality, yes, to the structure of the afterlife. But the subjective experience of how we experience that in terms of a tunnel of light or no tunnel of light. I've had many friends come back and well, either have NDEs or I've had friends who are dead and tell me what their experience was, and they're still dead. This is not an NDE. And they'll tell me what their experience was like when they died. And there was no tunnel of light. And they just were surrounded by loved ones, friends, loved ones. And by the way, just as an aside, loved ones they may not even have recognized whether they were in this lifetime as Kelvin Chin, or as Ellen, or as Mary. You know, we may not have noticed that, oh, those are other friends. And we look and we go, whoa, now I notice you, I see you. I'm dead now. Kelvin's dead. I'm just talking to you from the other side now in this example. And I see wow. And I haven't seen you in like 500 years, 1,000 years. I don't know what, pick a number. But in other words, they're old friends of mine who are there also to support and greet me on the other side and acclimate me. That's a big part of what goes on, is the acclimation to the change from being in this dense reality to this much, lack of density in the reality there on the other side, which I'm calling on the other side. Okay? But to your question about tunnel of light, what is that light? The light, I think, is a number of things for different people. And they'll experience this in different ways, okay? So the light that people often experience, that they often experience as external to them, is in some cases their own mind. Now, those of you who I've taught meditation to know what I'm talking about when I reference this idea that my meditation techniques get you out of the 8-inch plastic bucket. You've heard me say this a million times, those who've taken my meditation course. Those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, what I'm saying in a nutshell, very quickly, briefly, is that most people incorrectly think their mind is very limited. It's not. It's huge. It's vast. And when people who are used to experiencing their mind in a very, very limited way, start to experience their mind in a more vast way, they see light. They see a lot of light. And they incorrectly assume that is not them, that is something outside of them. And those who've been meditating for a long time, when they die, they go on the other side, everything's full of light. It's not a big deal because they're used to that. Because their mind is, in fact, when you've been meditating some number of years, you start to experience that your mind is light. You start to experience the essential energy of your mind through meditation after a number of years of meditating, okay? But even in the first few days and weeks and months of meditation, people can start getting glimpses of that because they start feeling more relaxed. They start feeling more free. When you feel really relaxed by 1,000 times, 10,000 times, and feeling more free by 10,000 times, that can sometimes be interpreted as light or lightness, freedom, and physical seeing of a brightness. Now, the tunnel of light also could be interpreted, experienced as, in fact, bright light on the other side because it's energy. We're talking about energy forms here, okay? So if you're in a crowd at a rock concert in physical reality, and there are, let's say, 50,000, 20,000 people at a rock concert. I don't know how many go to rock concert. 10, 15, 20,000 people at a huge rock concert. And they're all crammed in there, right? And let's say you die, and then you're on the other side now, and you're energy form. And what I've experienced many times, and I've heard this from other people who have died, is that when they die, not just their friends and loved ones come. Those are the ones you recognize right up front. But a lot of other people come too. Because it's like, oh, somebody dies. Hey, it's died. Let's go check it out. Think about it. What did I say? The first principle I said, there's less difference between this side and the other side. The minds are still the same. They still have this crowd mentality. It's not like you die and all of a sudden, oh man, I'm going to be like Jack Kerouac, No, it's like I'm going to be Mr. Independent. Now, no, if you have a sheep mentality, not a sheep, but you know what I mean, a crowd mentality, on this side, your mind is the same when you die. So when somebody dies, it's like, whoa, check it out, let's go. And there's this big crowd. Well, what's a big crowd of? It's a big crowd of energy. Because they don't have physical bodies anymore, they're energy. So that could be another source of this light feeling of, whoa, the light was just so bright. That's also possible, okay? Here's a third or fourth, I've lost count how many possibilities I'm giving you here of this idea of light on the other side. Another possibility is there are sources of energy who are really, really bright. I'll give you some specific examples. Maharishi, Jesus, Shankara. I've experienced them. Their brightness of their light coming from those energy sources that are individual minds is ginormous. If any of those characters are there in the crowd, that's going to be flood lamp, halogen or whatever, one of these, the brightest whatever kinds of lights you could have type of experience. That's another possibility, okay? And heaven forbid, not to, that was a pun, I guess, but, that 2 or 3 of those characters show up when you die. Imagine the brightness. So anyway, there's a lot of possibilities here, okay, of why this, but you may not experience tunnel of light, and you may just be like, boom, I'm on the other side, and it's kind of bright again, but not to the same degree that I'm talking about. So there's all these gradations. Eben Alexander's, does that help? The person who asked the question? Yeah? So Eben Alexander talked about this in his book, Proof of Heaven, about his near-death experience. And I'm going to save details of this for one of our later sessions, that's when it's more appropriate. But I just want to say this about his experience. It was his experience. It was, and he even says this. I've been to his lecture. We exchanged books at his lecture. I gave him my book and so forth, and we talked a little bit about it. He says this in his lecture, where it's like that was his experience of New York City. Other people go to New York City, they have another experience. So his experience of quote unquote what he calls heaven, because he was a Christian, he uses that Christian terminology, was that description. Other people may have a different description. he's fully aware of that, cognizant of it, and open to saying that. All right, I've got some other questions here. Let's see. So I got 3 different other people here. I'll just, I won't name names so we can keep privacy here. So let's see. Is it possible to be harmed by others on the other side? So here's the thing. Is it possible to be harmed? That's a little bit getting into the, what is it? The 1, 2, 3, fourth session. I'm going to get into this in much greater detail. But let me just say this. The short answer is nobody can harm you in the way that you're worried about being harmed, which most people are being worried about harm physically, because you don't have a physical body with organs in it. You don't have this dense physical structure. You have a light body. You have a much less dense physical structure, and that physical structure can change forms. You can make it change forms, and I've had many experiences of that. Again, which we can talk about in another session and so forth in much greater detail. But the harm that most people are worried about, no, people cannot harm you. And because even the mental harm that you're worried about, the emotional harm, you know what? You can just say, hey, see you later, and boom, you're on the other side of the universe in a split second. Because you can travel. Let's talk about this idea of travel on the other side in time. You can travel at least, I argue we know how fast the speed of light is. Speed of light, something can travel around the earth 8 times in 1 second in the speed of light. You know, if in the speed of light, at the speed of light, forget about what I said in 1 second. At the speed of light, something can travel around the earth in 8 seconds. So that's incredibly fast. Let's just say you can travel at half the speed of light, which is still like ridiculously fast. Somebody's messing with, you could just say, see, and you're out of there, and you're just, boom, and you create some other. Here's the thing. On the other side, you are creating your own little vacation spots. So basically, you're in this afterlife structure where people you don't want to hang around with aren't in your vacation spot. So it becomes a moot point what you're asking that person, okay? Another question, is the other side connected to Earth, do you think, or is it more universal cosmic? This is a great question. Is there a merging of other energy forces with the souls from Earth? Okay, so those are 2 different questions. Let me answer the first one quickly. The universe. So is there another side, or does it think it's more like, is it here, or it's more like, how does that work? That's my second point that I said in my general statements. I said the there is not so far away; it's just unseen by us. I call it the other side, because what else are you going to call it? Because we can't see it, right? But it's more here than we realize, because all of the beings that I communicate with are here. And for all I know, I don't know this for sure, but I'll put the word out and we'll see if we get some information back on this. But for all I know, the same mountains that they're climbing are the same mountains that we're climbing. It's just that they're experiencing them much more differently than we are, because they're in energy form. Okay? Is there a merging of other energy forces with the souls from Earth? A merging? Can you tell me what you asked me? If you could drill that down a little bit and ask that, and I don't exactly understand the question. Is there a merging of other energy forces with the souls from Earth? I don't know what that means.
Yeah. All right. Well, what I meant to say, or what the point I was trying to get to, is that are there, I don't believe we're the only life in the universe.
Right.
So those other, I think, alien forms part of the other side, as well as people, animals?
Oh, okay, good question. I got your question. No. So I've had, when we get into my other experiences, at some point, I'll get into this in a little bit more detail, but I've had experiences on other planets too, not just this one.
Okay.
So And I remember this obviously, and I'll tell you about that another time. But there are other there. First of all, I'll tell you guys an anecdote here. This is a true story. I had an assistant in the '90s when I was a VP at the American Arbitration Association. I won't mention her name, but she was my assistant, and she had one of her closest friends was a pilot. I don't know, F-16s or whatever they were flying then, and escorted President Reagan, to a bunker that was down, I don't know how far down the bunker is, one of these missile silos in Kansas or whatever the heck, deep, deep, deep in the earth, because Reagan wanted to go see the alien who's living down there that the military had, whatever, captured. And that's more real time than my experience, right? But my experience is that there are other planets with other humanoid life forms and other alien life forms on them. That's different from what I'm talking about in terms of the other side, afterlife, and so forth. Okay? That answer?
No, I know. I get that, Kelvin. But when they die, do they go to the same side as we do?
Good question. Yeah, that is my understanding. Yes, but here's the thing. It's more like what I just said at the end of my last answer, which was we create our own vacation spots. So you don't want to be hanging around. You want to be hanging around with humans. You hang around with the humans at your vacation spot on the other side. And not only that, but you hang around with humans you want to hang around with. That's the way it kind of is. So Jehovah has joked recently about creating, I can't remember his exact word, but anyway, he's joked about creating places, places where the Muslims can hang out and not get badgered by the Christians or the whoever's who don't like, or whatever, the people who don't get along with the Muslims. And he has said that he would create different places for different groups of Muslims. In other words, that's the degree of vacation spot thinking that I'm talking about. It is a time for us to rejuvenate ourselves. That's the point. It's chilling out, it's relaxing, it's enjoying and not having the pressures of having to be in a physical body and eating and feeding our organs and all, and working and job and all that stuff that it takes in this dense, challenging physical reality that we live in. Okay? So another question. What about perception of distances, places, sunlight, water, trees, and so forth? Are these things there too? And my experience is yes, that these things are there too. And it's not clear to me whether these things that are there are the same things that we are experiencing sometimes here on Earth. So here's what I think. I think we can come back and we can climb the same mountains here in an energy body if we want, and we can create other places like Eben Alexander's reality that he experienced when he had his NDE, which looked very different, although similar to Earth, but different from Earth in different ways. And you can read his book in description on that. Or you can YouTube him and you can hear him talking about it. But that's my thinking on that. But who creates these different scenarios? We do. To your question, Cayman. We do. We create them. And we can create them jointly with our friends on the other side. Like, Cayman's a buddy of mine. So Cayman's on the call. And Cayman and I both die, let's say, hypothetically. We both physically die on planet Earth. We meet up on the other side. And Cayman and I go, dude, let's go make some cool ship on an ocean here. And let's go hang out and just cruise for a while. We can do that. All right? it's a place of more possibilities, we could say, because we're not restricted by the same physical reality issues that we have in this dense physical reality. We are minds. Our energy, our mind is continuing. So it's a place almost where we can be incredibly creative. There. Okay? Other questions? Other questions? Let me see. Did I get everybody who's on the chat room? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just when you're talking about going and having different places for different people, different minds.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I'm a little disappointed. I would kind of hope that once we pass to the other side, we can start recognizing our own humanity and not have these divisions that are based on religion or whatever that's made, basically.
So here's the thing. So again, what did I say? When the mind dies, the body dies, the mind continues. That means those biases you have as a mind now or don't have as a mind now are going to continue. So what I just described to you was a choice. I didn't say that there are these places you have to go to that are, in a sense, segregated into certain belief systems or whatever. But for those people who are stuck in their ways and cannot relax, but for being only with people who are of their belief system, there are places for them, and they can go there. Do you see the distinction with what I'm saying and what you're saying?
Yeah. No, I do. I guess I was just hoping for enlightenment, as it were.
That's a dream. You know, that's the dream that everybody hopes for. The people think that, oh, once we die, all of a sudden I become smarter. All of a sudden I'm not biased anymore. Oh, all of a sudden I know how to play tennis. I was a terrible tennis player, but in heaven I can play tennis like anybody's business. No. If you stink at tennis and golf on this side, you're going to stick at tennis and golf on the other side. So it's like you may be less frazzled about it, so that may improve your game. In other words, you may be less stressed about it because it's more vacation mode. You're going to be less stressed on the other side. Yes. Okay. Would that improve your game? Yeah. For a game like golf, which is, a lot of it's a mental game. Yeah. Okay. Maybe your game will improve. But it's not, your mind is your mind. That's the thing. So the cosmic irony here is for all those people, whether they're Buddhist, Christians, New Age, spiritual people, or whatever, who think that, oh, I'm gonna die and everything's gonna be, die and go to heaven. This whole notion that Paul created of die and then be saved and go to heaven, that was a Paul creation. That was never a Jesus teaching. So we can get into that in another session. I want us to kind of stay on track here with what we're talking about today. But that is a myth. That's a complete 100% illusion. And the communications I've had with these leaders of various spiritual traditions, it bears this out. There's still disagreement amongst the leaders of these traditions, Merit Paz. So if you're talking about disagreement amongst the leaders of these various traditions, think about it. You're talking about Joe Schmo of some religion dying and then all of a sudden becoming enlightened and having this incredible perspective? Not happening, right? So the reality is, what's the cup half full of that? The cup half full of that is we need to get our act together here and now, wherever we are. We're on this side or the other side. And I would argue that now's a good time here while we're on this side. And that's what I do in my work. That's the underpinning objective of all my work, is to get people to live more freely, openly, stress-free, fear-free now. Because you carry your fears with you to the other side. If in fact your mind is still the same mind and you are fearful now, you're going to be fearful on the other side. That's why I'm all about overcoming the fear of everything now. Deal with it now. Because then you'll have a much happier, more enjoyable time after you physically die. Okay? Our mind is still the same mind. The mind doesn't just all of a sudden change. Now, yes, the mind, we get more relaxed because we're not stressed about going to work and feeding the body and the illness. There's no illness issues and so forth. Okay, yeah, I get that. So yeah, you could say, well, there's a significant change. There is a significant change in our psycho-emotional state from that standpoint, but not from the standpoint that you and I are talking about. Okay? Questions? Other points? Anything else?
I hate to,
Go ahead.
I hate to keep asking all the questions.
No. Go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to ask if there's any correlation, do you think, between psychic experiences, one has with other people on this plane and what one could then experience with somebody who's gone to the other side?
Yes.
I've had an experience where I've had a communication from somebody on this side.
Yes.
That's what I'm just wondering.
Yeah. In other words, does it increase the probability that if you and I had, let's just use you and me as an example. So you and I had psychic experiences on this side, and then I died. Would that increase the likelihood that you and I could communicate? You still being here alive in planet Earth and me being dead. Yes, right? I say yes. Increases the probability. Yes. It's all probabilities. It's all likelihoods. But yeah, I said that would significantly increase the probability. Because what's communicating is our energy is communicating. So if our energy is communicating well on this side, on that more energetic level, you're calling psychic or whatever, however we want to language that, same thing. So yeah, transferable, I would say increased probability, yes. Yeah. Good question. Other questions? Other questions. Experience of time. Let me just talk about that. I'm looking at other points I have on my sheet that I didn't get into the detail of. If anybody else has other questions, just yell them out right now. Interrupt me. But experience of time. So as I said, the experience of time here on Earth is different after we die in that other plane or whatever we're calling that. I call it the afterlife. Plane, plane, the afterlife. So let's say, and I think that is a source, I think that difference in time is a source for a point of confusion that some people, you'll hear some psychics or some people say. Because, as I said earlier, there's still change occurring there. The speed of change may be different, but still change occurring, okay? And therefore, there's an experience of time. But it's different because the speed of change is different, therefore the experience of time is different. All right? So let's say that somebody is talking to, let's say I died. Let's use me as an example. Let's say I died and a good friend of mine is in California, in San Francisco, my buddy George, and he's still alive. And let's say my kids, one of my kids is traveling on a movie shoot, and Jesse is in, let's just say South America. And let's say Sammy is doing a fashion shoot in New York. All right? So we got New York, South America, and San Francisco in planet Earth, three different people, and then I'm dead, let's just say. And let's say I come and I communicate with each of them. But let's say I go and I'm communicating with Jesse in South America first, and on some level I'm communicating with him, and in my time, or like I go to, a few minutes later, or maybe even 5 or 10 minutes later, I communicate with Sam in New York, and George, another, some minutes later with George in San Francisco. I'm on the other side. My experience of time is very, very different. Okay? So, in my experience of time, I've gone to these 3 different places on planet Earth, but in their time, it's experienced, it seems, at the same time. And then they get on the phone and they start calling each other and say, Kelvin just visited me. And they say, well, no, Kelvin just visited me. And out of that comes the conclusion, the incorrect, I would argue, conclusion, that Kelvin can be in the same place at the same time. I mean, different places at the same time. He can be in different places at the same time. Whoa. So, but in my time, it's maybe minutes have passed, maybe hours have passed. I don't know. Between the times I've talked with them, but in their time, it's like, it seems matter of, it's like at the same time. My point is that out of that comes the conflation or the confusion and the misinterpretation amongst people. You'll hear the people say this all the time. Oh, you die on the other side, and you can be at more places than once. And psychics will even incorrectly interpret their own experience that way. But it logically makes no sense, because if there is change, there's individuality communicating with the psychic, and obviously there's some individuality communicating with that psychic, then that individuality has identity. If the individual has identity, then that individual is in the field of change. And if in time is a measurement of the field of change. So time exists there, but like I said, in a different way than it exists here. Okay. Any other questions? Anything else before we end the session? I know we've gone a little bit over. Oh, let's see. Got another question here. I used to get roughly shaken awake when I was a kid. I would wake up and no one would be there. I never remembered a nightmare or anything, just the shock of being shaken awake. Would or can people from the other side actually do that, or might that have just been me having rough sleep? Well, it's impossible to tell, obviously, but is it possible to get shaken awake by somebody from the other side? Yes, anything's possible. Just like on this side, it's possible for somebody to physically shake you awake, or even energetically shake you awake in another room. If somebody's having a really rough night, energetically you can feel that sometimes. Some of you may have experienced that. So it's not even just a physical shaking. So extrapolate that, extend that experience to somebody on the other side, energetically, possibly shaking you awake. Yes, it's absolutely possible. And the earlier person who talked about the visitation in the dream, that's a form of being shaken by the other person. Like, not shaken, but you know what I mean. Communicated with or touched by the other person. Maybe it's a better way of saying that, in the dream. But yes, you could get touched or shaken awake by somebody from the other side. That's possible. Yeah. And it's, as you say, it's impossible to say whether that's, just you're having a rough night's sleep, or maybe a dream that woken you, that had awakened you. Impossible to say. But certainly, is that possible? Sure. Sure. But nothing to be afraid of, because you are in control of your mind all the time. And that's this idea of sovereignty of the mind, which we'll talk about in another session in greater detail. But I just plant the seed in your head, in your mind. The sovereignty of the mind. You are unique, sovereign. You are in control of your own mind. You're in control of your spirituality. Your mind is in your control. Nobody else can control your mind. That's the point. So don't be afraid of what I just said about, can somebody wake you up? Yeah, but just like somebody can wake you up on this side, but they're not controlling your mind if they're waking you up on this side either. Right? Questions? Anything else? So just to close, you're welcome. Just to close, what's the bottom line? As I said, The bottom line is that we're going on vacation when we're on the other side. However you want to articulate it in detail, but that's a good bottom line way to look at it. It's vacation mode. It's time to relax. We're chilling out. We don't have any cares in the world, as they say. We don't have to feed our bodies. We don't have a job to go to. We don't have to any responsibilities other than taking care of ourselves. That's what we're doing on the other side. So we're rejuvenating ourselves. We're recharging our batteries. That's what's going on the other side. So it's basically playground time again, vacation mode. And you can create whatever you want to create on the other side. That's up to you and your own creativity, because we are energy forms playing with energy on the other side in whatever way we want to. Okay? So it was great. It was fun. I hope you got something out of this. Please give me some feedback and so forth. And if you have other questions, feel free to, shoot me an email or whatever. And I may start collecting questions for our next session. And you can think about questions before the next session. Remember, the next session is going to be July 5th, just as a reminder. They're every other Thursday, so it's every other week. And in discussion with some of you guys gave me some feedback when we were creating this video conference series, and you suggested that we do it every other week so people could digest, think about it, and then think up questions for the next sessions and so forth, so you wouldn't feel overloaded. So July 5th, Thursday, same time. Can we get glimpses of the other side? We're going to talk about near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences. And any of you who have had out-of-body experiences or near-death experiences yourself, or friends of yours you've heard about, friends of yours who had NDEs or OBEs, then please write them down, write yourself notes, and then share them with us the next time, at our next session. Okay? Let's see, one other comment here. Let's see. Great. Interesting you said going on vacation on the other side, because I've heard the dying say they are getting prepared to go on a trip. Yeah, getting prepared to go on a trip. That's what it's like. They're when the people are dying, who's coming in the room? You hear about this, where they see other people, other friends, and you can't see them in the room, and they come and they're preparing them. Their loved ones, their friends are coming to prepare them for the other side. And they're preparing them, like you just said, for a trip sometimes. That's the phrase they often use. That's what it's like. So it's nothing to be afraid of. That is my bottom line, is to try to reduce and hopefully, ideally, eliminate, but definitely reduce our fears about all of this stuff. Because it is much more fun than people realize. Okay? So we'll talk more in a couple weeks. Great to see all of you. And have a great couple of weeks. Be well.